Today we've got an awesome guest, Ray Garrett. How are you?
Doing great, man. How about you?
Doing good, doing good. Thank you for coming on. I've been excited about this for a couple weeks. So a little backstory, Ray and I worked together. It was over 10 years ago at a company called ZipRealty, and they're not around anymore. They got acquired, and then I think their technology ended up getting shelved. But there was about 10 of us in a central recruiting office. I think you either co-led that office or you were like second in command, but that was an awesome year. It was like my first recruiting gig. And then it was also like my first time actually getting laid off. But everyone in the recruiting department got laid off except for one lone survivor who was just too skilled to actually let go. And it was you, Ray. So you went on to lead the whole recruiting engine for the company, built all these systems that grew the agent force for Realogy and now Anywhere. I remember you were like a superhero when it came to Excel, doing all this wizardry with VLOOKUPs and pivot tables, and you had built all these lead systems for us, and it was awesome. But every single morning, this is what I remember about working with you, is we basically got to see you teach a master class in something every morning with a whiteboard, and it was either something about recruiting or human psychology or philosophy or something about the recruiting process. And it was something interesting every time, and it actually took me several years of extra corporate life to realize just how rare your leadership style is. And honestly, I miss it, man. I mean, I wish I could start every day with one of your master classes. So if you could go ahead and fire up a live session on TikTok every morning about 7:30, that would be great. But yeah, man, I miss that. I'm a big fan of your work and some of the philosophy that you post about on social media as well. So very excited to have you. Thank you for joining.
I'm thrilled to be here, man. I've enjoyed watching your podcast on TikTok and YouTube and everywhere social media is found. So I suggest that folks check you out as well.
Well, thank you for that. So, tell us your story, Ray. Who are you?
Man, I'm an old dude at this point. We've been doing this for a long time, but my name is Ray Garrett, and I guess I'm a lot of things. But I started off, I guess maybe kind of starting off professionally. I worked a couple little jobs, and then decided that I would be better off waiting tables, when I was in college. And I started off in the restaurant industry. I think that's kind of where it all started, learning sales. You don't think about sales in that way, but learning sales and learning relations with people. And more importantly, people are never, and you got to think about, maybe this is yourself, maybe it's not, but people are never more impatient and angry when they're hungry.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a part of dealing when you're talking to somebody and they're hungry, they're just waiting for their food, and you're trying to put on a show, you're going to get kind of mixed results. But, efficiency there is appreciated first. And once they're in the middle of eating and once they're in the middle of doing their thing, they certainly open up a little bit more to you, and you're able to kind of upsell things and that kind of stuff. So learn the efficiency of turning tables and all that stuff. So that was like a master class in and of itself. So I suggest that everybody do that at least once in their life if you can.
Agreed. Yeah, I want my kids to do that early on.
Yeah. Did you ever work in the restaurant industry?
I worked on a cruise ship for a year as a waiter, and I got trained by the Filipino mafia. I started running trays of food up escalators, during turbulent times at sea. Yeah, that was interesting, but I eventually became a waiter, and, I got to play a part in all these different restaurants. But yeah, I suggest everybody do it for a year. It's kind of a game-changing thing for you to go through.
Yeah, it's definitely, it helps you appreciate different aspects of life. I think that's the key part. And it kind of really started me down the philosophy of pain, which I will get to, which you probably remember about many of the things that I try to teach. That pain is very, very essential to what we do. But eventually, when I was going to college, I guess I was a young man, early 20s, I started off thinking, at least, and really kind of started off from the time I was 3 or 4, thinking I was going into politics. So I studied political science, international relations. In school, I became part of these several different national programs. We had professors and students all doing UN style conferences at different schools and things like that. So that was the path that I was going to take. And then long story that nobody really cares about, but I became very disillusioned with politics, as you might see by some of my posts. I decided to drop out of school and figure it out from there. And I was going to go back in the restaurant business, but I grew up with my dad and my uncle restoring old cars. And I just said, you know what? I love cars. I'll just go sell cars until I figure it out. And that was my second education. I became a national sales trainer at CarMax and different places. And just seeing CarMax in particular, the way that they ran a business. And you might remember from working with us, the waterfall metrics that they use, that every part of a sales process has its different measurement. So I learned that there. That to me, for my sales career, was like college, being at CarMax. That was where I received my advanced degrees there for sales anyway. Eventually, I ended up going back to school, majoring in philosophy. It was the quickest way to get a degree. Minored in information systems, which is where I learned my tech skills. And then that's when I started out in sales. And not too long after that, I decided to go to grad school and could not work in car sales anymore because 60, 70 hours a week in grad school didn't mix together. So I decided to get a job, or I say job, but I decided to become a real estate agent because I write my own schedule, so to speak. And I've been in real estate ever since, 20 some years now. And while I was an agent at ZipRealty, killing it, crushing it as an agent there. Probably should have stayed in that, because I was rocking and rolling. But one of the higher ups came and they saw that they had like a referral program as an agent. If you referred another agent in, you got paid a pretty decent amount of money. So I was like, that's like a supplement my income. I was paying my mortgage with that. And finally they came to me and they were like, you're recruiting more people than our recruiter is. He's leaving. Would you like to pick up the district recruiting position? And so I did it and became national recruiter there at the office that we worked at. And by the way, I was laid off there myself, but they kept me on as a contractor for 10 months and they hired me back on.
Okay.
And then we were acquired by Realogy, which became Anywhere Real Estate in 2014. So I built a recruiting department there, 26 people, built a recruiting system for them, and it's still in use today. The only thing from ZipRealty still in use is the system I built in Salesforce. There you go. There's my backstory.
There you go. Yeah, I'm still baffled that they didn't use like the ZipRealty map, the mapping, like the Zillow engine, basically. I can't believe they scrapped that.
They tried to, and then it was just a different model, man. Realogy and now Anywhere Real Estate, Realogy being a very traditional Northeastern style company. When you go to their headquarters, guys in like suits, ties, buttoned up, gray hair in the building, all of that good stuff when you go there. When you go to ZipRealty's headquarters out there in Oakland, California, I mean, it's young dudes. I mean, they're dressed in holy jeans and they're in offices playing their guitar and mandolin and singing. They don't get there until like 10:30. They leave at like 2:30. It was a different culture, man. So, yeah, it was ZipRealty in the tech world and meeting that culture. I think that, they're definitely good products. It wasn't a great fit, I think, for that company.
Yeah, they were walking around Ninja Turtle t-shirts, playing ping pong, and didn't mesh well with like the classic real estate community. So,
yeah.
Well, hey man, what's going on in real estate right now? I guess, can you get us up to speed on like the current state of affairs just in the past couple of years with interest rates the way they are?
Yeah. I mean, I look at rates today, and interestingly enough, I looked at the exact rate. It's like a couple days ago, and when that exact rate was in play the last time, it was 2005. 2005, we were crushing it, and today we're not. So like there has to be some other difference other than real estate, just from the logical point of view. So you start analyzing everything that's going on and like, what's the difference? And one of the main reports and main pieces of data that I've used for a very long time. I may have showed this to you before, I'm not sure. But I look at the average or median home price in America all the way back to the 1950s. Then I look at the average household income, again, back to the same time period by month. Then I look at the price of gold, the average price of gold for that month or that year. And recently I've been starting injecting cryptos and Bitcoin into that, but that's neither here nor there because that doesn't really trace. But there's a remarkable correlation between those two. So what I'm looking for generally, how many salaries does it take to buy the average house? And how many ounces of gold does it take to buy the average house? The reason that's important because gold is a really important indicator to the value of the dollar. Dollar's down, gold is up, vice versa, usually. So the big difference, I think, between 2005 and now is that in 2005, it took about 4 salaries or 4 average salaries or household salaries to buy a house. In 1970, it was 2.5. And today it's almost 8. It's probably 8 right now, 8 salaries to buy a house. So what that means is that, especially at the entry level, it's pushing a lot of people out of the market. So in general, one of the more important indicators as well is that if all things being equal, pretty much all industry experts agree that if 3.5 million people have to move every year, these are people who are in the Army, and the Army transfers them. I mean, you get your transfer orders, you got to. Doesn't matter what rates are or whatever. That's pretty much exactly how many units we are at per year right now. So in other words, basically the only people who are really moving are the people who have to move.
Right.
Because of the salary problem, because of the affordability problem. And then during 2021, when rates were low and people were artificially rich, and they were going nuts. I mean, they were moving across town in the same school district just to get a bigger backyard or something. You don't see any of that right now.
Right.
It's a tough market right now. Those data points, I think, point that out more than anything.
Yeah. How are we going to find our way out of this situation? Because I'm hearing that a lot of parents that have 18 to 30-year-olds they're complaining. And I watched a TikTok the other day. There was like a psychiatrist or a therapist that had a lot of middle-aged parents that were worried about their kids because they're flocking to gaming and kind of giving up on careers and joining the system, like conforming to the system, because it's just, it feels out of reach. It feels impossible to buy a house and make enough money these days. So they're just like, yeah, I'm out. I'm just going to try to stream on this gaming channel and see what happens. So yeah. It's what do you think the long-term impact of this is, and or is it, can we find a way out of this, or is this the new normal?
Yeah, well, I don't know about the new normal thing, but because things are constantly in flux. But the thing you're describing, especially among young men, is, I think, at epidemic portions, and young men are falling behind pretty much in every measurable metric that you can imagine, whether it comes from college admissions, whether it comes from graduations, whether it comes from employment, even salary. Young men are falling behind. And there's probably a number of reasons for that. But I think that, that's one of the bigger problems that we're facing, even more so than housing. I don't know. I mean, I know it sounds strange to hear it from somebody in the real estate industry, but this American dream, so-called, of owning a home, it has created generations of people who have spent 30 years trying to pay for something that your great grandparents just went out and built. Or the idea of paying for something for 30 years would have been foreign to them. Your great grandparents wouldn't have known that. As a matter of fact, I always tell people, I guess, given my background, I've studied Latin, and you study a lot of different types of Latin. I bring out to people that the word mortgage, literally, mortgage, is death grip. That's what it means, death grip. And so I don't know if it's a good thing or not. I mean, I certainly think it's great to own property. You should own real estate. God's not making any more of it. So that should be an aspiration, but it's definitely not an investment strategy. And certainly the concept of going in and when I'm 30 years old or 28 years old and buying a house in my parents' neighborhood that they had to work their whole life to get to, that concept is obviously dead. I expect to see other types of ownership instruments, co-ops. I think tokenization is going to play a huge role in real estate in the future. The idea of going in and plopping down a bunch of money and then getting a high interest mortgage for 30 years, I think that idea is dying, but I think people always want to own property if they can.
Well, I should probably get into more of that. I'm just like, I don't want to buy anything because the interest rates are so high. So I'll wait for them to come down, but then there's always some reason not to get into it, right? So, but you got all kinds of certifications, right? You got an eclectic background. You're into, you study all kinds of things, philosophy, algorithmic trading, systems design. So what drives your relentless pursuit of just diverse knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably less of a drive and more of a compulsion, I wouldn't suggest it for anybody that doesn't really have that. I mean, sometimes it's more, I think it can become a burden at some point, not an idol, but definitely a burden. Just the almost compulsive type of behavioral trait that requires me to chase something down to the end once I think about it. I can't just like think about something and then just let that be the end of it. It usually, especially if something really strikes my curiosity, is usually a pursuit, and it can last 2 to 3 days. It can last 2 or 3 months. I mean, it's one of those things. I'm lucky enough to kind of retain a lot of stuff, but I wouldn't suggest it for anybody. I mean, it's especially in the modern world. It seems like people who can specialize are much better off, and I've tried to do that, and I'm pretty good at a lot of things. I don't think that I'm the best at anything, so I think that's a blessing and a curse sometimes.
Every time I talk to you, I learn something. You're like an encyclopedia of history and philosophy and everything. And you majored in philosophy. So how does that systematic thinking from philosophy impact your approach to just solving business problems?
Well, that's all it is, really. A lot of people have kind of the misnomer, your lower level classes that everybody gets exposed to if they take like just kind of, and it used to be a required class. I don't even know if it is anymore in colleges, where you would take a philosophy, especially of like Western thinkers and that kind of thing. Maybe not Eastern, but Western thinkers. And you just kind of learn about their general principles. And that, I think that is like the beginning level of the study of philosophy. But really, once you kind of dive into it, it's about thought, just like you said. It's about processes. It's about structured thought. It's about, I think that you used to hear me say all the time when our job is to turn words into numbers. That's data. Well, in reality, that's kind of what you're doing in logic. You are using basically like Boolean strings. I don't know if you're into cars or not, but if you ever look at the wiring diagram on your car, that's a Boolean string. It's basically the relays and switches and things are all logic gates. And you kind of understand the way that logic is supposed to flow. So I think that anybody that majors in philosophy or just studies it, like scholastically studies it, the jump from there to using logic in like programming and design and things like that, it's a very short jump from those two things. So that's probably primarily the way it's helped me. I think that it's also kind of given me a leg up in not just politics. I wouldn't say politics, but just kind of understanding the way that people move, the way that people are motivated. And I think that that's probably the best way of describing it.
Yeah, I still remember one of those master classes you taught one morning at ZipRealty was about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how that should play into your discovery conversation with a new agent. Like, what are they missing? Where are they on this hierarchy? That's how you should approach the conversation from there once you understand where they're at. So that was cool, man. And like I said, you're the encyclopedia of knowledge. So your philosophy is process before technology, right? For true innovation. So what's the biggest mistake that most companies make by ignoring this?
Well, you mentioned, you said it. And not to really make a lot of people upset. It's not that I am against agile or lean style project management or product management, but there is an inherent problem with those two ideas, if you ask me, which you are. So the biggest problem is what I would consider user stories. So let's just say that you have an inefficient process in place. You got hundreds of employees manually doing tasks. It's just like you ask Henry Ford, when he said if you ask his customers what they wanted, they just said a faster horse. They don't really understand the concept of what's trying to be achieved holistically with the system. They understand their task. And when you ask them what they want, they're going to tell you what's going to make their task easier. They never really ask the question, is it necessary? And that's another thing. Like I mentioned the Boolean strings or, wiring diagrams, so to speak. I usually say wiring diagrams rather than like De Morgan's theory or something. So people kind of understand, because most people have looked at the wiring diagram before. And that's really how it is. It's how information flows through a system. And once you mathematically look at a process, it becomes pretty easy to see where the bottlenecks are in that process. And I really love, what's his name? The guy that just retired, Alabama's coach.
Nick
Saban. He's like, we focus on process. We don't focus on winning games. We focus on the process of playing a game. And if we do all the process perfectly, then we win. Or we lose sometimes, and that's okay too, as long as we do the process. Most companies don't refine and streamline their processes before they decide to build systems. And what ends up happening is inefficient processes get baked into the new system. And it fails on several different levels. Number one, I think it fails on the fact that it doesn't really make things easier because it's kind of disjointed. It causes lots of chaos. And more importantly, it really doesn't give you a cost advantage. Many companies, when they design these systems, they are supposing that automation is going to give them a cost advantage because it's going to lower employee overhead and all kinds of things required to get to their system. But it really doesn't if you haven't made your process systematized. The second thing is that it doesn't provide ROI. It's very, very difficult to point to a system and say, hey, it has made us this much money. Sometimes you can point to a system, if you're lucky and you've designed it properly, sometimes you can point to it and say, hey, it saved us this much money. That's rare even. But how rare is it that you point to a brand new system and you say, but this system made us this much money? That's very rare. And what ends up making you money is the same thing that makes Alabama win football games. They have very clearly defined processes, streamlined. Once that's in place, then they think about shortcuts on how to maybe automate some processes and things like that. Same thing with Tony Dungy. I hate to use football analogies, but that's kind of what Tony Dungy's thing was. Throw away the rule book. He's like, you learn these basic things. You see the guy's knuckles, like the movie, you see the guy's knuckles turning white, he's going this way. If you see this play run, you stand right here. It was so fast that nobody could overcome it. That's really the biggest problem that I see, is that these projects, not only are they inefficient, not only are they baking in bad processes, but if you ask them, okay, when is the project going to be completed? Generally, they'll give you the quarter, but not the year, So don't get me started, but if kind of give you a well-rounded response in short form, that's it.
Yeah, well, so the process, I mean, that's key in recruiting as well. That's what separates like an average recruiter from a great recruiter, is they have a thorough process in place for recruiting. And it's not so much like what's your niche, right? The process can be applied to any skill set. So that's why I hate like niching down so much, because it's like, wait a minute, what are you trying to hire? Okay, we're going to use the same process to hire that skill set using slightly different lingo for that skill set and slightly different screening questions, but the process is the same. So what makes like an ideal recruiting process in your opinion?
Well, the first thing that I think that people fail to do is define what the recruiting process looks like. And I'll give you an example from our world that we shared. It's probably similar, but it may be different in different types of recruiting. But in our world, our job was to call real estate agents. We wanted to hire as many as we could hire, as long as they were productive. Now, sometimes we got ads coming in from like Career Builder and places like that. But the first step is calling them. I've never hired anybody that I haven't called and had a conversation with. The second step was getting them into an office. To get them into office, you got to schedule an interview, right? So that's number two. You schedule it. Now, just because you schedule it doesn't mean they're going to show up. So the third thing is that they show up in the office. They shake hands with the hiring manager. The fourth thing is, was the offer made? Did they make an offer? Now, again, this may be different in other. And if the offer is made, did they accept it or did they decline? Okay, so all of those. Now, what most people say was, okay, well, I get that, but what does that have to do with creating a recruiting process? Well, you benchmark those things. You've got to know how many calls I've got to make to get to one interview scheduled. You got to know how many interviews scheduled I have to have in order to get to somebody in the office. Once they're in the office, need to know how many people you need to get to the office in order to be able to, make enough offers to get people hired. Those are the milestones. And once you're able to define a milestone, then you're able to measure the milestone. That's number one. That's called benchmarking. You have a set that you know where these things are supposed to be. Now, if people stop there, they're already ahead of most, let's say 80% of everybody that's trying, if they stop there. But if you want to take it one step further, what you can start doing then is measuring the relationship between the milestones. That's where you go into, I think that's where it gets turbocharged. So like if I look at my call or a conversation to interview ratio, that's supposed to be a certain benchmark percentage. Let's just say for every 20 phone calls or every 20 conversations, I schedule one interview. Okay, that gives me a 20-to-1 ratio. Love it. Now I know. Okay, let's say for every interview, every 3 or 4 interviews I schedule, 3 of them should show up in the office. That means I need a 75% interview scheduled, 25% interview ratio. 25% interview scheduled, 75% interview scheduled. 75% interview scheduled, 25% interview scheduled, 75% 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 interview scheduled, to office show ratio. Let's say that I want to offer 50% of the people who are in the office. I need a 50% ratio between interviews showed and offered. And let's say that I want 50% of the people I offer to be accepted. Now I know that's my workflow all the way across. The beauty about that is that if you're not recruiting, if you're managing a team of recruiters and somebody's not recruiting, what are they going to say? Usually the managers are going to say, go make more phone calls. The phone calls might not be the problem. They might have the right amount of phone calls. They might have the right amount of interviews scheduled, but the interviews that they scheduled aren't showing in the right proportion. Then you can go to that recruiter and coach them based on just that metric. Maybe they need to spend more time. Maybe they're not verifying the appointment and calling an hour before, or whatever their verification method is. So you can work on those particular skill sets to help improve a sales process. Without those benchmarking, without those relationships, you have no way of coaching yourself or coaching other people to get better in the process. And that's what I found out is key. The other thing, which probably we'll get to, is, I mentioned it earlier, you got to know the pain. Recruiting or sales is nothing without the pain. And I mentioned it in the book that if you go buy a drill, you're not really buying it because it's a certain color. You're not buying it because it has this much power, or a 20-volt lithium battery or whatever. You're buying it because you need a hole. So like, if I don't address what the pain point is, like, all of these metrics don't really matter as much. So that I need to have how I'm addressing their pain built into every step of my process. And more importantly, every step of the process should be increasing the pain. I need to find where that pain point is and start poking it a little bit.
Yeah, you talk about disengaged leads and how to bring them back to life, and you suggest like poking the pain. Can you give a quick example of how you do that effectively without kind of pushing somebody away?
It's very, very difficult to look at any type of motivation without pain being there. So it's said that people are motivated one of two ways, either towards pleasure or away from pain. Well, I would say I've met very, very few people who are powerfully motivated towards pleasure. So take a guy goes out and buys $100 million jet. You're like, okay, well, he just wants to fly around. I guarantee you, if you go talk to anybody that sells jets, those people are escaping a pain point more than anything. Whether it's like at the end of the year, they found out they made too much money and they get like a write-off for the jet, whether or not their travel schedule is just not allowing them to like make the type of money they need to make because they're flying, on a passenger airline, or they have to charter private jets to go where they want to. It's too expensive. There's a pain point driving those decisions. So what I would suggest to you is that anybody that gets disengaged or disinterested, as long as they're still talking to you, the reason that is happening is because you haven't found the pain, not because you're poking it too much. As a matter of fact, the more you uncover a pain and the more you're able to, of course, with charisma, you're not making fun of them, you're not pushing them down, but the more you're able to make them aware of it, the better. Now, what I would say is that, like, if you have a problem with tooth, most people are obviously going to want to get that fixed. Now, if I came to you and you were like, you had a bad tooth and you were just injecting Novocaine in there every day, that's not good. That would be a system where you have found a way to dull the pain, but you have not solved the problem. And it would be intrinsic to me. And you're like, no, my tooth is not that bad. I'm like, well, Blake, if you don't think it's that bad, do this for 3 days. Don't take any pain medication. Don't take any Novocaine. And let's see where you are at the end of 3 days. At the end of that 3 days, I bet they would be more interested in going to the dentist. They're not going to be disinterested in going to the dentist. So the key point is to find the pain and really help people bring it to the forefront. As humans, we have a natural tendency to kind of push and suppress those things down. And the pain is generally very, very shallow underneath the surface. You don't have to go too far to find it, and if they're calling you, they're reaching out to you, at some point they have a pain. If they're putting their information on the web, they're submitting a form and sending it out into cyberspace, knowing that there's likely somebody going to call me, I've got a pain somewhere. The reason I become disinterested and disengaged is because the schmuck who called me didn't seem to care about my pain. He only wanted to tell me about the products that he sells or the benefits of his product. I tell you, I would submit that they don't give a crap about the benefits. They don't give a crap about what you are or what you do. They only care about their pain and how you can solve it.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why I start every recruiting conversation not by pitching a job, but by trying to figure out, okay, what's the reason for looking here? What are their motivations? Like, why are they actually on the market and what's motivating them? So, yeah, that's also what separates an average recruiter from a good recruiter. You know, the tendency is, oh, you look like a great fit. Let me tell you about this job, blah, blah, blah. And you kind of just vomit all over them and you haven't even figured out. I got to figure out, is this role going to solve your pain first? And then I'll pitch you on it. Right. So that's a piece that's typically missing, but I also look closely, and I've always nerded out on the KPIs, right? The conversion metrics from one step to the other. And you can kind of just take how many placements you need to get in a year and work backwards using those benchmarks. And you know exactly how many calls you need to make and how many candidates you need to submit to hit that end goal. You said the conversion is the most crucial KPI. So what's a common lead generation strategy that typically looks good on paper but fails at conversions?
What I would warn people against, and you may have experienced this with your company, and I've experienced it many times. When you hire a marketer or a marketing team, they define conversion much differently than we do in the sales side. So what I would say is that like both are required. But if you think about the salesman and the marketer and a building, let's say we're selling cars. The marketer does marketing, and I define that as everything that gets them all the way to the door. As soon as they get to the door, the salesmen shake hands. And that's when the sales process starts. So that's the difference between marketing and sales, by the way. Now, you ask about like, you know, what's not fruitful. Well, you work at a marketing team and you start using the word conversion, and we haven't defined that. The marketing team is going to define conversion as getting a person through that front door. Their job is done. You know,
Right.
Unfortunately, from the support sales guy, that's not how you define it. When you shake hands, that's when your relationships are starting. You define conversion as how do they actually take a new set of keys and drive the car home, you know? And when you start talking about conversion to a marketing team, they're trying to drive leads. And I think that the key factor there is that you've got to really kind of define what you're looking for. If you're looking for brand awareness, that's one thing. If you're looking to drive leads, not all leads are equal. And I think that what you're looking for is what I would call a warm handoff. You're not looking for, let's say, Facebook leads that obviously everybody that's ever bought Facebook leads know that you can really crank up the lead numbers, but the conversion is usually pretty bad because there isn't any price point or any barrier of entry for submitting that. You see something you like, you just put it out there, you forget about it. You know, I don't really have to do much to be able to submit that lead. Now, I would imagine that, and I don't know this for sure, but I can just speak from my own personal experience. Whenever I do Facebook ads or Google ads or whatever, whenever I take them off site and I lead them through a process or a funnel process on my own, I have a lot more luck with them. Even though the numbers are lower, the sales process converts better. What I would say is that when I define conversion, I'm meaning how many people am I introduced to who actually buys my product. That's the key. That's the key factor. And what I would say is that comes from a lot of things. You got to know your customer. I've developed 14 real estate agent personas, and each one of those personas are looking for different things. You know, the teacher is looking for education programs. The aggressive salespeople are looking for high commissions, and they're looking for tech that's going to help them convert. So all those different people are looking for different things. Well, if I am in position to offer tech and high commissions, then I should be going after aggressive salespeople. If Facebook ads are generating a lot of people who are beginning salespeople and teachers who love the education piece, and my value proposition is focused on tech and high splits, I'm not going to have a lot of success in conversion. I'm going to have a lot of success in driving people through the door. So I think that your marketing campaigns have to be congruent to your value proposition, and not just for the sake of getting people in the door, but for the sake of getting those people who come in through the door to shake hands and drive off with the car, so to speak, you know?
Yeah, I would love to know what those 14 personas are, because they can be applied to any skill set, I feel like, not just car buyers or real estate agents or whatnot. Yeah, I need to dive into that with you sometime, but I also want to chat about your book, right? You wrote a book called Sales According to Paul.
Yes.
It's there behind you. It's on Amazon. We'll link it in the description here if you want to buy that. But what's one or two ancient principles from Apostle Paul that is still surprisingly relevant to modern sales?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. Well, what I like to say is that, of course, Paul is not selling the gospel. I always start out by saying that. I'm a believer, and I know that, people come to faith because God enables them, not because somebody sold it to them. However, with that said, with that kind of out of the way, Paul does some amazingly relevant things in today's market, or in any market from eternity past. So a couple of different things that I would point out, just kind of broad topics. In this book, by the way, when I wrote this, and I really have a passion for new salespeople, and anybody that's ever gotten into it, new in sales, new in recruiting, which are very similar, in the beginning, you just got to survive. You got to survive. So that's really what the first half of the book is about, is how to survive this thing, man. Because it's like, nobody's going to tell you that. People will give you like closing skills or whatever, but you can't pay the mortgage. Your kids are going hungry. What the hell good is any of that stuff? So it really is very synonymous with being like left out into the woods, and you've got to survive. You're not trying to build a mansion. You're trying to get some shelter over you. You're trying to get a fire going. You're trying to find water, that kind of thing. So the book talks about that. But as far as Paul goes, one of the best examples I can give you is that Paul goes to Athens, Greece, in an area called the Areopagus. And that's where all the philosophers used to hang out. And they would do nothing, the Bible says, except talk about some new philosophy day in and day out. And Paul went there, and he took a tour of the city, and he saw all of these statues made to the different Greek gods. And he saw one there that said, "To the unknown God." So he basically sets out in front of him. He says, I'm going to preach to you today about the unknown God. And he's the one I want to talk to you about today. And he's actually the God of all things. He started talking about the resurrection and lots of stuff. You can read the passage in the Bible if you want to. I won't go into too much detail there. But in essence, what happens at the end is what I would say is the greatest lesson that any salesperson can take. And Paul did this not just in Athens, but everywhere he went. You can find this in Scripture. So the Bible said that some people heard the message, and right away they're like, how do I know this Jesus? Most all of them, when he mentioned the resurrection, just laughed and scoffed and walked away. But then there were a few there that says, I'll hear you again on this matter. And so the following week they came and heard him again. That is a metaphor for sales, because here's what happens, and recruiting as well. I mean, I tell you guys this, or anybody this, that have to hit the phones. So imagine standing in front of a giant apartment building, and you're selling magazine subscriptions or anything, widgets, whatever it is. Let's just say magazine subscription for the sake of argument. You're selling these magazine subscriptions, and before you, 100 apartments with 100 doors, and they drop you off and say, you just go there and you knock on every door and you sell. Here's what's going to happen by average. If you knock on all 100 of those doors, you're going to hit 3 of those doors, and it's going to seem like the person inside there was just waiting for you to knock so they could buy your magazine. That's going to be 3. You're going to find 80 of them are going to say varying cuss words at you and slam the door in your face. Now, that's 83 people. What about the 17? The 17 are the people that aren't ready right now, but they say, I'll hear you again on this matter. Okay? So that's exactly what Paul is describing here. Now, here's what happens. As a new salesperson, you get into this business, you can survive on the 3. You're not going to get rich, but you can survive on it. So as long as you're willing to knock on those 100 doors as many times as it takes, you'll survive. You will die quickly if you try to chase the 80, because they're not going to do it regardless. If you're like, they're trying to slam the door and you just shove your foot in there so they can't slam the door, and you spend all your time trying to talk them into it, you're going to die quickly. That's not going to happen. But the process of getting wealthy, the process of making a comfortable living in this business, is how well you set up a system in place to manage the 17, the people that said, I'll hear you again on this matter. And I go into detail in the book how Paul had expert system set up for managing this process. And you can read the book if you want to get the book, but that's kind of the crux of it.
I love it, man. Yeah, it makes me think of the new sales approach where it's like multi-prong. You got these sequencing campaigns, and it used to be where you needed to touch someone, like they needed to see your message 6 times before they were willing to buy. And now I think it's up to like 8, 9,
Oh yeah.
10. Every year it seems to grow, which it's like becoming very difficult to get through, right? Because nobody wants to hang in there and keep making the calls, keep sending the emails. So people are flocking to like leveraging content to stay in front of people versus leaning so heavily on these other channels, which seem to be getting ignored. So how does that approach apply to, modern marketing and email campaigns and content? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a data guy, man. So like anything that I'm going to suggest is it's going to be data driven. Emails are, when's the last time you've read an email that's not on your phone? I mean, you may because you're in business, but like most people don't. If it's not on their phone, they don't read it. If it has images in it, it's gonna get kicked to the bots. I mean, the bot's gonna kick that out immediately as
Spam. Yeah.
So as an example, I would go through and we'd send about 1 million emails a month. It's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of emails. Now, sometimes we would be sending them to the same people. I think we had like 200,000 or so, and we'd send them once a week. Now, what I was looking at is what does the data show? You're looking at read rates, and usually have your call to action in the email, like a click through or something like that. So we had a system tell us whether they were looking at their mobile device or whether they were looking on almost unanimously on their mobile.
Oh, wow.
So you should be in your emails including some sort of mobile, like if you have an app, you should be pushing the app to the app, that kind of thing. But regardless, what I'm looking at is, okay, of the people who read the emails or the read rates, you see the people who read them, of the people who click through, what is my marketing campaign? Because emails are cheap, but then like as you start getting, as you start initiating more advanced types of techniques, you're going to start spending more and more money, and you can't spend it on 1 million people. You've got to spend it on like 50 people. So you got to wield that million down. So the first strategy I would say is, whether it is email or any type of thing that you're using, you got to make sure you have enough eyeballs to get good data. You're not going to get that from 300. You're not going to get it from 500. Once you start getting 10,000, 15,000, if you think about it like this, a good conversion rate from emails is like 0.5%. If you do 0.5%, man, and you know how to do that well, you can make a good living in email marketing. Well, what is that? I mean, that means that to get one, you have to have 200. And that's if you're lucky. Most conversion is like much lower than that. It's like 0.1 or even 0.008 or something crazy like that.
Right.
And you got to get the reps in to be able to know if it's effective, number one. So don't make a lot of decisions on the efficacy of these campaigns until you get the reps in for the data to drive it.
Yeah, I just spent like 2 half days trying to increase the volume of emails that I can send through Apollo by using multiple domains, because there's sending limits. You can send like 50 a day to maintain a healthy outbox, which is not enough, right? So you can't use just one email domain. So I bought 4 more because Apollo allows for 5 email domains. So I had to go through, buy the domains, and go through. I had to become like a Microsoft systems engineer and configure those with the right user licenses and then get those working in Apollo just to increase the output. So yeah, it really is a numbers game whenever you're doing the email marketing. But so you've scaled the recruiting efficiency there at your company by 40%, which is an incredible number. What's the single most impactful system change that you made to actually achieve that?
I would say that it's process, probably. Like, I always go back to process before I go back to system, but I baked the process into our system, kind of like the benchmarking that you said. But we use Salesforce as our platform, and built a Salesforce system that focused on those milestones. So so that's number one. Number two, and I don't know if it's don't know if it's 100% relevant, but like, just think about now, both of us are married guys. We've been married for a long time, but just take your brain back when you're single, and you're having problems meeting girls or whatever, like a lot of single guys are these days. You have one person that says, I'm going to teach you how to find the right girl for you. And I'm going to give you all the skills that you need to go talk to 100 women and you'll be able to do it. And then the other guru says, when you walk into the bar, I'm going to have 20 of them chasing you.
Right.
You're going to spend your money on the one that says that I'm going to have them chasing you, because chasing other things are really difficult. And that's part of the modern, when you talk about the switch over, back in my day, the emphasis was go out cold call, go knock on doors, go pound, like you've got to chase it. You got to make it happen. Today with social media and the different channels that the regular person has access to, you've got to determine how to make them chase you. That's the difference. And we were pretty successful in doing that. Here's the thing. It's the idea of bootstrapping something. Back in the day, you could just hustle, get out there and pound the phones, make the phone calls, send the emails, knock on the doors, and you could, eventually get through if you were willing to work hard enough. These days, as you mentioned, it's 8, 10, and that's 8 good touches, 10 good touches that you need to get in front of somebody if you're chasing them. Why do that? Why not have them come after you? Now, what I'll say is that, hey, that sounds great. Well, how the hell do I do that? You spend money. You have to spend money. Like there is no free approaches anymore. You write the freaking checkbooks, you max out the credit cards, you can do what you got to do to get people to chase you. Now, that's easy for me to say because I did it for a company, that had the money backing me. And that's the first big thing is that that I went to the company and I said, for me to do this, I'm going to need and it was a relatively modest budget for a national campaign. I said, I'm going to need a $300,000 marketing budget. And on top of that, I'm going to need, instead of having 8 recruiters, we're going to need 22 recruiters set up across the country. So we need to invest in this thing. And that's what I would say, maybe as a marketer, as somebody who's going into like looking for gigs or whatever, show up all the time right now, but I'm not going anywhere that doesn't have a budget to make it happen. And finally, I was able to convince the company that, okay, we're either going to go under or we're going to build. And you remember when they shut our office down there at ZipRealty, they only had like 800 and some agents. By the time a year and a half later, after spending the money, we doubled that. We were at 1540 when they bought us. So that's the key. I mean, I think that you've got to hit this thing like it's a business. You can't just go into business anymore expecting to bootstrap. There are special people who can, but if you're frustrated right now because you just can't make it happen, my guess is that you're listening to people that say, hey, you can just go out there, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make it happen. Some people can. That person may have been able to do. Not everybody can do that. If you're going to do this, do it like a business does it. Spend the freaking money, get educated on how to spend the money, and get out there and make it happen.
Well said. Well said. So that Salesforce system that you built, you actually deployed that to like 5,000 agents. So what did you find as the biggest challenge to actually get folks on a widespread basis to actually adopt a new system that you built?
Yeah, it's always a big issue. Now, we had the extra wrinkle of the fact that these agents are independent contractors, which means you cannot tell them what to do. That's the big thing. If you want to say, like, what's the difference between an independent contractor and an employee? An employee, you can tell them what to do. And if they don't do it, you can just cut off the paycheck, and let the problem figure itself out. But with independent contractors, if you tell them what to do, you can get sued for millions of dollars, if you're a big company. So you can't do that. You've got to inspire them. So the very first thing, I think that everything has to be intuitive. And sometimes that's difficult, especially if you have an external CRM. There are CRMs I love much better these days. I love Close. I don't know if you're familiar with Close or not, but
never heard of it.
Great CRM. And the reason it's so great, and there are others that do this now. The reason I love it so much is because it uses your contact list on your phone. Anytime you make a phone call, if you've designated somebody a client in your contacts, it just records it. You don't have to go in at the end of the thing and say, hey, I talked to this person. We talked about X, Y, Z. It just records the phone call. You send an email to that person, it just records it. Intuitive data collection has got to be the main thing. And that's the second piece of it. Data collection has to be the purpose of any CRM. It's not to make the salesperson's life easy. That's the byproduct of building a system, the person who is using it. But it might not start off like that. You have to build first for data collection, because without the data collection, you can't build efficiencies. So that's key. Now, agents buy into this thing primarily because it solves a pain, not because it creates a pain. If your system creates the pain, now you've got to build something to solve that pain. And you're in a cycle. Constantly you roll something out and people complain about it. Then you're like, okay, well, how can I make this easier for the agent? And then maybe you build that thing, and then there's something else that comes up. You're constantly solving the problems that you created. This system has got to make people's lives easier and reduce pain. And if you ask any salesperson, I go out there and ask 100 salespeople right now, does the CRM that your company make you use, does it add difficulty or subtract difficulty from your workday? How many of them you think is going to say, oh, wait, it absolutely subtracts. Even though it probably does make them more efficient. So it's got to be, the perception has got to be that this is making me money. It's solving pains that I have. It's making me better at systematizing my relationships.
Yeah, there's this saying with the CRM, because every salesperson hates like documenting stuff in the CRM. But the problem, if you're trying to get good data, is that if it's not documented in the CRM, then it basically never really happened.
Yep.
Right. So that creates a lot of discrepancies in the data. And you mentioned, I think, somewhere about using AI for an ETL process. So how does that work? How is that accessible to a smaller business who may not have like a deep tech skills? I guess they could leverage a new CRM like Close, but I really want to chat with you about AI, leveraging AI and, some use cases that you found valuable in that.
Well, I am far from an expert on integrations. I've learned a little bit about integrations as I've gone. I've been lucky to have some very talented people on my team as we go. So my concept, and I can't remember the tool, it was, if you look at like fuzzy logic, basically it's just a system of trying to figure out like if this word, if it's spelled this many different ways, if it's within 70% close to the word you're looking for, then just automatically change it to that word. That's kind of what we're trying to implement here in the ETL process rather than in the CRM. So before we even bring the data into the system, we are trying to correct problems that happen. And why do the problems happen? Usually because of data validation. Sometimes you can validate data in your system, but you have lots of integrations. For instance, if you're dealing with 15 partners that are sending you leads, and all of those guys have systems and they're just pushing leads to you, you can validate pretty much anything you want to validate. But number one, you can't validate their systems, meaning they're going to type it in how they're going to type it in. And number two, if you validate it too stringently, you're going to get errors in your ETL process because your system's not going to allow the data that's coming in because somebody wrote a note next to the phone number, in their other system they're trying to send you. So what I think AI, the way that we use it in a small way, is on sources, because we have to have source data to know if our marketing and everything is through rates are what they need to be. And these, you would have ABC company, right? You have capital A, little b, little c, and company. Then you would have capital ABC and co. And then you'd have all these different variations on the source. And as you know, when you try to roll that up, they're not going to see that. Your system's not going to see that as the same source. So we had to use AI to say, okay, little a, little b, little c, and co. is probably ABC company. So we're going to change that word to ABC company before we input it into the system. And AI is really good at that kind of stuff. It's also good at making predictions on what data should be. So in other words, if you have a bunch of people coming in at Raleigh, North Carolina, Raleigh, NC, Raleigh, NC, Raleigh, NC, and then one comes in Raleigh with no state information, it sees the word Raleigh and it's just going to make the prediction that field should have been NC. So it will eliminate the blank field there. So now, does that help the salesperson? Yeah, it does in some ways. I mean, they have more complete data, but does that help the the poor data guy that's trying to get this? Hell, yes, it helps us when that's what it's designed to do. So that's what we're using it for. Now, I mean, there are lots of other ways we're using it, but that's probably one of the most creative ways.
That's a big one. Yeah. And I run into that all the time, even on LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn doesn't even have that. They've got like duplicate company names because of the same problem you just mentioned, Apollo,
Yeah.
they deal with the same issue, so they need to adopt the AI technology in their deal. But all right. So, hey, back to that 17% you were talking about. You talk about tackling objections, and I consider you one of the masters at overcoming objections. And there's one that you've taught us at Zip. It was the feel, felt, found method. How does that disarm skeptical clients, and are there any others that you found that work very well?
Yeah, that's an oldie but a goodie. I'm telling you, man. If you just learn these older techniques, people say, "Well, that's a bygone era." It's not. I mean, it works pretty much anywhere you try to use it. And number one, I think that it works because it is a process for making people feel heard. So if they say, I can't come to your brokerage because the split is too low. Well, I understand. I understand how you feel, right? As a matter of fact, way back a few years ago when I first came to the company, I felt the same way. But what I found was that the volume that I generated from having all of these leads made me more money overall. What would you rather have? 3% of Facebook or 80% of a local business down the street? The percentages don't matter. It's the size of the pie that matters. So that kind of wording is a way of presenting something by saying, okay, I heard you. I can commiserate with you. And here's my testimonial of how I got over that. And testimonials, the modern way of saying that is reviews. I mean, reviews are the currency of online shopping, and that it really is, and they're so powerful, and that's why I think the feel, felt, found method works so well. I mean, there's lots of other methods that I use, but generally, I would probably put them in the category of how does it increase their pain. So from a recruiting point of view, so you'd have an agent come in to the office. Very first thing I'd say if I'm doing the interview is, well, what brings you in? And sometimes they'll just go in and tell you, hey, I'm not happy where I am, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes they'll be like, what are you talking about, stupid? You called me, and I'm like, well, yeah, I did call you, but you took the time to come over here. You drove all the way across town. You took time out of your day to sit here in front of me. I'm just curious, what prompted that? Like, I don't know. I don't move on. As a matter of fact, I will end the interview if I can't get a satisfactory answer right there. So that's what I'm talking about up front. You've got to set the stage up front. So for instance, they might say, well, I'm finding I'm just not doing as much production and I'm just kind of seeking out. Then you got to acknowledge that. So production is the issue. Where would you like to be? And they're like, well, I need to be at, let's say, $3 million in volume. I'm just making stuff up off the top of my head. I'd be at, this says you're only at like 600,000 now. That's a long ways to go. What is your broker currently doing to help you get there?
Oh,
Right? You've been there for 3 years. You haven't gotten there yet. Are they doing anything different this year than they did last year? Well, no. Well, it sounds to me, and I'll just use you as an example, it sounds to me, Blake, you need to make a change. You need to make a change. Am I right? And they're like, well, I don't know. Well, what am I missing, Blake? Until they admit they have to make a change. And here's what I'll say. I was like, Blake, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you have to come where I am. Maybe I'm the right fit for you. Maybe I'm not. But regardless of what happens, you want to get the 3 million, you're at 600 right now. You need to make a change, right? You got to get them to agree that. So if I could teach you anything, it's from my hero, Zig Ziglar. Yes is comprised of lots of small yeses, the big yes. You got to get that yes. If you can't get that yes, do not move on. Stay there. A lot of salespeople try to rush it and go to the next stage before they get that little yes. And that little yes makes all the difference. So anyway, there's a couple of techniques I probably could go on, but
yeah, I love it, man. I love it. Yeah, it was interesting when I was learning the whole real estate like industry and diving into the MLS data, and what you discover whenever you're trying to recruit agents. You think there's a lot of like big producers out there, and what you realize when you zoom into every market, 90% of agents are only doing like 2 to 4 deals a year. And then you've got this top 10%, and they're basically doing all the deals in that market, which is crazy.
Yep.
But you find that in every industry, right? Every market has that hierarchy.
What do they call it? The
Uh,
Pareto principle or something like that? The 80-20 rule, it, I mean, it's probably even more skewed than that in the real estate industry, but it probably is in lots of sales industries where it's not 20% of the people, it's maybe 10, even 5% of the people that making the money.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot in that hour. I did want to chat with you a little bit about just some other random stuff, but you let me know if you're running out of time. I wanted to ask you about Star Wars, though. We were chatting a little bit earlier. What is your favorite Star Wars movie or show?
I'll go with movies first. So we're gonna go. I'm gonna start with New Hope. This is where I would suggest doing this. By the way, New Hope, Empire Strikes Back. Stop there. Cut it off before you go to Return of the Jedi, because those are the two best movies. You see those, you ingest those. Then, what I suggest doing, going to the prequels,
Okay.
right? Then, after the prequels, watch A New Hope again, because you're going to see crap in there that you didn't see before. Now, you're going to move to Return of the Jedi. Now, we don't talk about the sequels. I don't think that they count, personally.
Right.
Uh,
The first one was good, but the last two, man,
Yeah,
what
I don't know.
happened?
See, the first one to me was just derivatives. It was, it ends up better. But the fact that you had Leia, you had Chewie, you had Hans, you had Luke, you had the whole team on that movie, and didn't put them in a scene together.
Yeah.
So then I think that apart from that, if you're going to add in the other stuff, I believe that I would watch the prequels, then I would watch Rogue One, and then I would rewatch A New Hope again. I probably would leave out Solo and all this other good stuff. Now, if you really want to kind of dig in, after this, you need to go into Clone Wars. You really need to understand Clone Wars to understand what happens between the second and third prequel. And if I really want to dig into it, I'm going to watch Rebels before I watch A New Hope again. Because it really kind of, especially the Jedi struggle, it makes you understand what's going on there.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, I was picking on you earlier because you haven't seen Andor yet, so that's like some of the best Star Wars. Because you're a political guy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Philosophy and
Yeah.
political science, and it's like a spy thriller. So you got to watch that, man. Then we got to talk again.
Yeah.
But yeah, Rogue One is one of the best things that Disney's ever done. You know, I'm a big Star Wars fan because of my background, but. Yeah, love the original and Empire Strikes Back. So I like that. I like that you've actually thought about this,
Yeah.
about the order to watch it in. And I would argue that you got to throw in Andor and then Rogue One and then A New Hope, right? Because it all builds up to how they stole the Death Star plans, and then it ultimately ends in the Death Star getting blown up. So
Yeah, I'll give you that. I
uh,
just haven't, a friend of mine's son is wanted to watch it with me, and I promised I would watch it with him, so I haven't watched it yet. But you make a good point there, and also I would probably throw in after Return of the Jedi, I'd probably throw the first two seasons of Mandalorian in after that. The other
oh
series I
yeah.
don't like, but the first two of Mandalorian I throw in after that. So there you go.
Well, if you watched Rebels and you like that, did you like Ahsoka?
Did not like Ahsoka. I don't think it did Rebels justice, and I don't think it did Clone Wars justice either. But but definitely didn't do Rebels justice. The Ahsoka was really slow moving for me. I didn't necessarily have a problem with it, which is it seemed disjointed. It seemed like it was rewritten a few times, and it was just very very slow. You had a lot.
Agreed. Yeah.
Rebels was not like that. Rebels was every storyline of Rebels answered questions. It made you think. I mean, it's a great series. Again, I can't recommend that one enough.
Yeah, I haven't watched very much of the animated stuff, so I need to dive into that. But when I try, it kind of loses my attention. I find myself scrolling my phone or something or falling asleep, and so I need to like give it the attention it deserves. So I see a lot of guitars in the background there.
Mhm.
I know you play. You're really good. You play at the church, and you're a talented guitar player. What's your favorite band?
That's a tough one. Well, I'm into so many different genres. I'm I would say that like if I'm talking about just like regular rock band, just plain and simple, it's gonna be the Black Crowes.
Okay.
Now back in the day in the alternative rock days, I really love Stone Temple Pilots. I think their bass lines were just amazing. You see, I love bass, so
Oh yeah.
So those guys, obviously Zeppelin, kind of high on the list. But I like some kind of off the wall. Now, if I'm talking about like, bluegrass, I think some modern bluegrass music is really, really good. But I'm gonna go back to the old days, Lester Scruggs, Tony Rice, people like that.
There you go. Yeah. We were in the minivan driving a couple weeks ago, and like just we hit a button and discovered the previous owner had like uploaded. I don't know if it's got its own disc drive or whatnot. It's not the CDs. You can't find them anywhere. The CD player's actually broken. But there's like this whole classic rock portfolio in there. And I started listening to this Derek and the Dominoes album, and I've been loving that. I've been loving some Derek and the Dominoes. They were only around for like a year or two, but it was Eric Clapton, and that's an awesome album. Do you listen to them at all?
I've heard the band, it's kind of like the Traveling Wilburys and the bands like that, Tom Petty and, Bob Dylan and people like that, like super bands and stuff. But I haven't. No, I've checked I've heard of them, and I'm sure I've heard some of their songs. I just don't know them offhand.
What's the last song you learned on the guitar?
Well, I say the guitar, I don't know. It's hard to say. I learn stuff kind of, if I learn them, I'm learning them in bunches usually. But on the bass, I've been learning a lot of Motown stuff. So,
Oh, okay, cool.
the Love You Back, Jackson 5, that kind of stuff. I love even stuff older than that, like Dock of the Bay, just there's stuff that moves. And, you have a click track when you're playing music, and it's click, click, click. And then you're playing and that click track is there. Something happens when you dial in. Like all of a sudden, when that click track starts grooving, you're kind of like dialed in. Motown music is good for that, man. It's like it helps you dial in.
Interesting. Well, hey, do you have any questions for me?
Well, no, man. I do enjoy your podcast, and I think that I'd love for you to get a wider exposure, because I think that what you do is talented, man. What you do is good. So if there's ever anything that I can do to help, like doing this, but outside of that, I'm there for you, man.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah. You never know what's going to happen with these podcasts. Some of them just get a few views. Some of them get, 1,000. I'm not like big time or anything yet. I'm still a small fry in the whole social media scene, but we're still putting stuff out there. It's episode 30, and you've been a great guest, man. I've enjoyed it. I love your stuff. I love your ideas, your philosophy. So I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you?
Find me on LinkedIn, Ray Garrett. So you can find me there. I'm on most of the social platforms, but I'm not really engaged in a lot of them other than LinkedIn right now. Some of them I do, some of them I don't. Found my book on Amazon. That's primarily where it is right now. So you can still get it there. And pretty much all the proceeds from the book go into marketing the book. So I don't make any money off of that. So, but I've enjoyed getting it out there. I've got some great responses from it and all that good stuff. And people used to ask me like, where can I go read these things that you're talking about? I'm like, I don't know. Well, now I know. I could just say, hey, go buy my book. There, you can hear those and more.
Yeah. Find it on Amazon. There'll be a link in the description, probably everywhere you can find the podcast. But I appreciate you coming on, Ray. Hope to have you again in a year or so.
Whenever, man. You let me know. I'm there for you.
All right, will do. Cheers, brother.
Talk to you later, man. Bye-bye.